In October of 1962, an American U-2 spy plane secretly photographed nuclear missile sites being built by the Soviet Union on the island of Cuba. Geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union ran high ever since World War II, resulting in a Cold War between the two superpowers. As both sides added more and more nuclear weapons to its arsenals, the threat of war became more and more scarier and possibly devastating to the entire world. And at no time was the threat of nuclear war higher than in October of '62, when the U.S. spy planes located those Soviet nuclear missile sites just 90 miles from the mainland U.S. President Kennedy didn't want Cuba or the Soviet Union to know that he had discovered the missiles. He met in secret with a small number of top trusted advisors for several days to discuss the problem and to weigh his options. This was a very delicate situation with a lot at stake, especially after the debacle of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, when America backed, financed, and trained a group of Cuban exiles to take down Fidel Castro's communist regime. This failed invasion strengthened Castro's grip on Cuba and heavily influenced relations between Cuba, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Cuba was looking for added protection from another invasion, and the Soviet Union were more than happy to help with adding nuclear missile sites in America's backyard, especially after the U.S. put their own nuclear missiles in Turkey. When JFK met with his closest advisors, they recommended a wide range of responses, from just giving Cuba a stern warning, all the way to dropping bombs on the missile sites, followed by a full invasion of Cuba. This had to be an extremely stressful time for the president. I can't imagine having to make these types of decisions. This was definitely a balancing act for Kennedy. You had to come off strong so that the missiles are removed from Cuba, but not escalate things in a manner which starts a nuclear war. On October 22nd, Kennedy ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba. He refrained from using the word blockade, which assumed a state of war existed, even though that's exactly what it was. He sent a letter to the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, declaring that the U.S. would not permit offensive weapons to be delivered to Cuba and demanded that the Soviets dismantle the missile bases and return all offensive weapons to the USSR. At the time, Soviet ships were en route to Cuba with nuclear weapons. Kennedy then went on national TV that evening to inform the public of the developments. He said, "It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missiles launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack on the U.S., requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union." On October 24th, Khrushchev responded with a statement that the U.S. blockade was an act of aggression and that the Soviet ships bound for Cuba would be ordered to proceed. At this point, a lot of things were in the hands of the two militaries, and one wrong decision on either side could result in catastrophe. U.S. spy flights over Cuba revealed that the Soviet missile sites were almost functional, and U.S. forces were placed on DEFCON 2. On October 26th, Kennedy told his advisors it looks like only an attack on Cuba would remove the missiles, but he wanted to give things a little more time. Later that afternoon, the White House received a back-channel offer from the Kremlin that they would remove the missile sites from Cuba, but the U.S. had a promise not to invade Cuba. It was followed by a direct message from Khrushchev proposing to end the standoff for the good of the world. But nothing's that easy. The next day, October 27th, Khrushchev sent another message indicating that any proposal deal must include the removal of U.S. Jupiter missiles from Turkey. That same day, a U.S. U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, killing pilot Major Rudy Anderson, who volunteered to fly that day, while another U.S. spy plane was chased by Soviet MiGs by the North Pole, but was able to land safely in a remote airstrip in Alaska. the U.S. started to prepare for an invasion of Cuba within days. JFK, with the help of his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, sent a proposal back to the Soviets proposing the removal of missile sites in Cuba under the guidance of the United Nations and a guarantee that the U.S. wouldn't invade the island. There was also a secret deal that the U.S. would also remove their missiles from Turkey, but that part had to remain secret, which it did for many years. On October 28th, Khrushchev issued a public statement that the Soviet missiles would be dismantled and removed from Cuba. The crisis was over, but the Cold War wasn't. Fidel Castro remained in power in Cuba. Many believe Khrushchev's decision to back down led to his fall from power in 1964. Kennedy's image, on the other hand, had strengthened domestically and internationally. To avoid any future possible miscommunications, a direct line called the Hotline was formed between the White House and the Kremlin. The Cuban Missile Crisis marked the climax of the Cold War and the closest point that the world has ever come to global nuclear war. Hopefully, that will be the closest we'll ever get. I wonder what would have been the outcome if JFK had decided to invade Cuba instead. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Please subscribe for more historical videos. Take care.